We're in Milton Keynes for CRE 2024. I'm Chris from Monkey Nut, and I'm delighted to be joined by David from Barnabas Aid. Hi, David. It's great to have you here on the CRE podcast.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Now, Barnabas has gone through quite a few different changes, hasn't it, in the last few years?
Yes.
Tell us about some of those.
Okay, well, we're known for nearly 30 years as Barnabas Fund. So started in the early 90s. And a couple of years ago, we changed our name to Barnabas Aid. Same organization. We still use funds, but we've named ourselves by what we do, which is give aid. We're an aid agency for persecuted and suffering Christians. So that's probably the most significant change. We've also changed our location within the UK. And one of the reasons we changed our location was because, as well as sending money, which is cost effective and time efficient, we now also send goods as well. So we needed more space. So we relocated within the UK. We've now got a warehouse. And from there, we send food and medical equipment to suffering and persecuted Christians around the world.
Wow, that's such a big overhaul of what you're doing at Barnabas Aid to go from just being that charity that supplies funding and helping people to actually now becoming almost a logistics operator, really, aren't you?
Well, we've got some people who do logistics well, but yes, I sometimes think of it as like going to the gym. We've been going to the gym for nearly 3 decades, but only exercising one arm. So the biceps and the triceps are quite well developed. We didn't realize it, but it was almost as if we had another arm waiting to be used. So we still send money. That's still the majority of what we do. But in addition, we also send goods. So it's a bit like we're now exercising both arms.
So let's talk about the word persecuted.
Yes.
Because there'll be people watching this who perhaps aren't Christian
Yes.
that don't really know what persecuted means. I think you and I both know what a persecuted person is, but let's talk about it from a faith perspective.
Yes.
Just walk us through
Okay.
what a persecuted person is and what that might look like in a country that perhaps isn't the UK.
Yes. So persecution is closer to home than we might think, but I like the way you frame the question. I often think about and ask congregations or schools or others the difference between persecution and suffering, and that usually brings it out. We all suffer because the world is one of suffering. It's not a perfect world. But as Christians, we're also called to suffer. So it's not just that we endure it, but we're called to suffer with people, and that's having compassion for them. But we're also called to suffer for people, and that's sacrificially. Someone might give their health or give something that they have for the sake of somebody else. And persecution is probably the hardest kind of suffering. That's suffering by somebody. So it requires somebody to cause the persecution. In other words, it need not happen. It's intentional. And for Christians, many of them around the world, very conservatively 1 in 10, that figure's out of date. It's much more than that, especially where they're in a minority within a nation or within even perhaps a region within a country. Specifically because they're in a minority, then they suffer intentional persecution. Many Christians lose their lives. Others lose their livelihoods. Others face a systemic persecution. It's written into the system that Christians, because they're not of the majority faith, whatever that might be, are subject to persecution. And that's hard, but what we try to do, and what we didn't change in our name, was Barnabas, because it means he was a figure from the Bible, character whose name was actually his nickname, but none of us tend to remember his real name. His nickname means son of encouragement. And we want to encourage those Christians. When I travel often to Pakistan, for example, and what I say when I meet Christians there, family, friends, people in churches, is you are not alone. Be encouraged, because Christians in the UK are praying for you and have sent support. And then that leads into different kinds of practical support.
Wow. That's really, really great answer. Thank you so much. And you talk about working all the way around the world, and
Yes.
persecution looks different in lots of different
Yes, it
places. And
does.
then we don't have time to unpack what that looks like in
Okay.
every single country.
Yes.
But I suppose I'd like to try and, without getting too heavy,
Yes.
unpack some of the persecution that's happening in places where people are really losing their lives
Okay.
for their faith. And how are you directly trying to help those people?
Okay, thank you. So loss of life is terrible
Hmm.
wherever it happens. But for example, I mentioned Pakistan earlier. There is a systemic persecution in Pakistan. The Sometimes it's written into law. Certain If you're a Christian, you couldn't become the prime minister of Pakistan.
Mm.
Um, but on a more local level or regional levels, Christians are overrepresented in often the most menial and the dirtiest of tasks. And there was a Christian called Michael. He worked cleaning sewers in Lahore, and he wasn't given the personal protective equipment he needed to do his job. And because of that, the toxic fumes in the sewers rendered him unconscious. His colleagues, the majority of his colleagues, wouldn't go to help him. And that's not because the sewage would make them unclean. It was because helping Michael, who's Christian, would make them unclean. The only two of his colleagues who would were Faisal and Nadeem. They went in to help, but they were also denied the personal protective equipment, and they lost their lives. So that means two families who have lost their breadwinner. So we're helping those families. And also, it means that Michael is alive to tell his story. And it's a story of suffering for somebody. His colleagues chose to suffer to try to help him, and they were successfully able to help him. I could give you figures, and I think I will, but there are individuals behind all of these stories. Christians in Nigeria, for example, are murdered in anti-Christian violence in the thousands every year. And that is continuing and increasing. But we're helping families, we're helping communities, we're helping churches, and that's the way in which we work. So our 6-word strapline is from Christians, through Christians, to Christians. So we channel what people give here, and we're a conduit to give those gifts, whether it's money or gifts in kind, to Christians in other countries. And what we also do alongside that, which is as important, if not more so, is to facilitate prayer, to resource prayer, and God channels those prayers, and we know that He always answers.
Yeah, he does. I know he does. I know that he answers prayer so often for people. And we hear stories of him answering prayer, especially around the persecution
Yes,
of Christians in, well, countries all over the world. As we know, they're being persecuted for their faith.
yeah.
I want to talk about boots on the ground and
Okay,
volunteers and
okay.
people, because you're operating a global, well, it's just global, isn't it?
It
I mean,
is.
I don't know how to word it. You're operating on this global level. How many people do you have able to go out and directly support people
Okay.
in countries?
So we don't send many people. The from Christians, through Christians, to Christians model, one of the the best things about it is that we're working through churches. So I go to Pakistan often. I can travel there without a visa, but I'm not there day to day.
Mm,
It's churches who are there day to day. And for that reason, we see the church as not a perfect aid agency, but the best aid agency through whom we can work.
mm,
So we don't often send people. As I said, we send money, we send goods. We have a few regional directors, but we work through churches. So churches, Christian organizations within many different nations contact us. We've worked in over 100 nations in the world over those 30 more plus years that we've been going. And they will make a proposal. We will have correspondence back and forth. We aren't able to say yes to everything. Often we get requests from individuals, and that's quite hard. But how do we verify? And church is one way of verifying. Church is not perfect. We know that because we're in churches
mm.
wherever we are in the world. But it's a way of making sure that we help, and we help as best as we can, and also ensuring my background's in medicine, and I always keep in mind, do no harm. First, do no harm. We don't want to do what we think is helpful. So although I know Pakistan well, I don't know it as well as the people who are there every day. And so therefore we take our lead from persecuted Christians. When we are able to help, then we do help. We'd often start with a small project, and that might lead on to something larger in the future.
That's brilliant. Now, you're here at CRE in Milton Keynes. How important is an event like CRE to Barnabas Aid?
It's it's important, I think, on three different levels. The first is that we are not the only organization doing what we do.
Hmm.
There are many Christian charities, and one thing that I keep in my mind, also at the front of my mind, is this: that we are all helping Christians. We're all serving the church. So one benefit of being here is that our supporters see us here with many other organizations, and it might be that somebody comes and says, looking to do this, and it might be that there's overlap with us. It might be that there's more overlap with another organization. So just being part of the church in its entirety here in the UK is good for us at CRE. And then it's good for two additional reasons. Our existing supporters like to come along, and it's always nice to meet somebody. We may have had correspondence by email, we may have spoken over the telephone, but to re-engage with existing supporters, and then of course to engage with people who haven't heard of us, and so looking for new supporters as well. So on those three levels, meeting with other organizations and showing that we're part of the same movement, if you like, and then reconnecting with our supporters, and then engaging people who will become supporters even while we're here.
Wonderful. David, if anybody wants to find out more about how they can support Barnabas Aid or just get in touch, is there a website that we can point them
There
to?
is. So it's barnabasaid.org. And if you're in different nations, you can choose which nation, but that will take you to our website. And then from there, all of what we do, we've called this donations project the Dot Gives. So that's our Dot Gives arm. But if you go to barnabasaid.org, you'll find out all that we do from there: prayer resources, how you can get involved, and how we can in particular pray for persecuted Christians around the world.
David, thank you so much. And if you would like to come to CRE next year, or perhaps you want to look back at some of the events that have happened in the past or the exhibitors here in 2024, why don't you go on the website? It's creonline.co.uk.